students. This is the last video for this week, and it's going to be called Summer 29. Please watch Summer 26, Summer 26, 27, 28, and 29 for this week. We left off talking about the end of the Proterozoic Eon and the beginning of the last eon, the Phanerozoic Eon. You should know that the Phanerozoic Eon began 542 million years ago. We're living in the Phanerozoic Eon. The Phanerozoic Eon, which began 542 million years ago, can be broken down into three eras. The earliest era is called the Paleozoic Era, and then we have the Mesozoic Era, and then we have the Cenozoic Era. It's easy to remember if you know Latin. Paleo means ancient, Meso means middle, and Ceno means recent. We're living in the Cenozoic Era. Zoic means life in Latin. So Paleozoic is the era of ancient life. The Mesozoic is the era of middle life. And the Cenozoic is the era of recent life. Ceno means recent. There's no way around it. You just need to memorize this. So you're younger than me, so you should be able to, your brain is fresher. If a middle-aged guy who's drunk thousands of Miller Lights can remember this, you can remember this. The Paleozoic era goes from 542 million years ago to 245 million years ago. The Mesozoic era goes from 245 million years ago to 65 million years ago. And the Cenozoic era, which we're living in, goes from 65 million years ago till now. So we're living in the Cenozoic era. We're going to start off talking about the Paleozoic era. Paleozoic era began 542 million years ago. And what happened 542 million years ago to start off the Phanerozoic Eon is there was an explosion of life that appeared 542 million years ago, where all modern life forms appeared, including vertebrates. Vertebrates are creatures which have bones, like you and me, and my dog, and your cat, and salamanders, and crocodiles. So the vertebrates appeared, and all the invertebrates appeared. All modern corals, squid, octopus, sand dollars, anything you could think of, shrimp, insects, everything appeared 542 million years ago. And it was an explosion of life that appeared 542 million years ago. And we call it the Cambrian Explosion. Why do we call it the Cambrian Explosion? Because the Cambrian is the first period of the Paleozoic era, the very beginning of the Paleozoic era. So why was there an explosion of life? Well, first of all, let me show you why geologists call it a Cambrian explosion. If you look at rocks that are older than 542 million years ago, according to principle of superposition, the ones deep underground, you have to search far and wide to find fossils. And if you find fossils like the Ediacaran fauna of the Proterozoic, you become world famous. That's how hard it is to find fossils. But as soon as you hit that line, 542 million years ago, all of a sudden you see a 100-fold explosion, or 1,000-fold in some cases, increase in the number of fossils in the rocks. So what caused this Cambrian explosion? Well, most scientists believe that the explosion began because organisms started to develop hard body parts, bones and shells. Why did they start to develop bones and shells 542 million years ago? That's when oxygen concentrations reached modern levels. And to make bones and shells requires the consumption of a lot of oxygen. Therefore, it's not, there wasn't really an explosion of life. There was an explosion of preservability. All of a sudden, it became much more likely when something died that it would get preserved if it had hard body parts. The Paleozoic era is dominated by the following life forms: invertebrates, which we'll talk about. But first, let's talk about the vertebrates. The first vertebrates to appear on planet Earth are fish. They appeared at the very beginning of the Paleozoic. And then came the amphibians. Amphibians are creatures like salamanders and frogs. And they were the first vertebrates to invade the land because they had lungs and they could breathe air instead of gills. Then the third type of vertebrate to appear during the Paleozoic are reptiles. But we could basically say that three forms of life, of advanced life forms, dominated the planet during the Paleozoic. First fish, then the amphibians, and then the reptiles. And the amphibians evolved from the fish. If you want to see how they did that, we'll talk about that in historical geology. We don't have time right now because of this is physical geology. But the amphibians evolved into the reptiles. At the very end of the Paleozoic era, 245 million years ago, that's when Pangea came together. So remember Alfred Wegener and Pangea? It came together at the very end. So as soon as Pangea came together, the Paleozoic ended, and the next era began, called the Mesozoic era. Before we start talking about the Mesozoic era, though, let's first. This is a. Well, okay. So, the Paleozoic, we talked about the Cambrian Explosion, and the earliest large life forms that we find in the Paleozoic are the so-called Burgess Shale, discovered by a man named Walcott, a Canadian. And inside the Burgess Shale, we find lots of interesting creatures like this thing here, called Anomalosaurus, with good lord, two pincer-like arms. Let me just type in Anomalosaurus. Anomalocaris. Anomalocaris. Okay. So this is found, Anomalocaris is found in the Burgess Shale, and it looks like this. Two pincer-like arms and eyes on the side of its head. These were predators of the early Paleozoic. And another creature is called Hallucigenia. What an odd-looking creature Hallucigenia is. Look at it. It doesn't have any modern ancestors. This is its head, very primitive eyes. It had 13 spikes on its back and 13 legs. Nothing like that exists today, but it's found in the Burgess Shale. Don't confuse the Burgess Shale. Write this down right now. The Burgess Shale is from the early Paleozoic, the early part of the Phanerozoic. Whereas the Ediacaran fauna that we talked about earlier on, that's from the end of the Proterozoic. All kinds of strange life forms are found in there, but they're large. They are large creatures. and they're complex creatures in the bird's shell. Okay, now if when we talk about the Paleozoic, um, coral reefs um, became very common during part of the Paleozoic, and those are invertebrates. They don't have bones; they have shells. Here you can see one of the early fish, and they don't look anything like today's fish because this is an extinct type of fish. They had armor on their body. They had bones on their outside of their body. We had large amphibians, and we have our first reptiles, like this thing here. This thing here appeared at the end of the Paleozoic. And if you see anything that looks like this, you should know this is not a dinosaur. There were no dinosaurs during the Paleozoic. This is a pelycosaur. A pelycosaur. I hate it that in Jurassic Park they show this as a dinosaur. This is not a dinosaur. This is a pelycosaur. It's a reptile. It appeared at the end of the Paleozoic, and it had it was a quadruped. That means it walked on four legs, and we could tell by its large head that it had a large brain, meaning it was a predator. All predators have large brains. If you look in the animal world, including humans, it takes intelligence to hunt. You have to track your prey, you have to plan your attack, and you have to protect your kill. Herbivores are much less intelligent, hence the sport of cow tipping. Here, so anyway, you can tell by its sharp teeth that it's a carnivore. These teeth are made for killing. Also, the thing that stands out about this reptile, Pelycosaur, is it has a large sail on its back, and the bones go out like into the sail, and so the blood vessels could go into the sail, so it could flush blood through the sail. There are three hypotheses regarding what this sail was for. What do you think that sail would be for? Well, one hypothesis is reptiles are cold-blooded creatures. Therefore, they need the sun to maintain their body temperature. That's why reptiles don't live in Antarctica, northern Canada. They freeze to death. So one way that this reptile could keep warm was to orientate itself so that it faced the sun and get more warmth. The other hypothesis is reptiles are not intelligent compared to mammals. You ever see two lizards on a rock and they're bobbing their heads up and down trying to intimidate the other one? Or some lizards, they can change color to make a frightening display of color to scare away other lizards. Maybe this pelycosaur flushed blood through its sail to scare away other reptiles. Or maybe the males used it to scare away other males during mating season. And the third hypothesis has to do with mating, and it's that the males had much larger sails, and maybe they used it as a sexual attractant, like peacocks. You ever see male peacocks with their display? They got this huge display to attract females. So he's like my friend Catfish in a bar. He shows his sail and says, "Hey baby, check out my sail. Look at my big sail here, baby." All right, that's not funny. So anyway, don't forget the Pelycosaur appeared at the end of the Paleozoic. The next thing you want to remember is the Paleozoic. Please don't forget, it began 542 million years ago. It ended 245 million years ago. And what happened 245 million years ago? Pangea came together. And when Pangea came together, the Paleozoic ended. And there was the greatest mass extinction in Earth history. that occurred 245 million years ago, marking the end of the Paleozoic and the beginning of the Mesozoic. And it's called the Permian mass extinction. This mass extinction was way bigger than the extinction of the dinosaurs. This was the closest Earth has ever come to Armageddon. More than 50% of land species became extinct. But in the oceans, more than 95% of species became extinct. It can't be a coincidence that this great mass extinction occurred at the same time that Pangea came together. When Pangea came together, why did that lead to this great mass extinction? Well, when Pangea came together, instead of having separate continents, we had one big continent. And without getting into all the details, that blocked the ocean currents. Because this one big continent blocked ocean currents from moving from east to west. And that led to the Earth becoming dry. We know that because we look at the sedimentary rocks and see all these rocks that formed in desert depositional environments. This dry weather killed out almost all of the amphibians. Amphibians need water. They have to keep their skin moist. They have to lay their eggs in water. Without water, they die. Many animals died due to this drought. But in the oceans, why did 95% of marine species become extinct? Well, almost all marine species live near the coastlines. And if you have 7 separate continents, you have a lot more coastline. When you bring them all together to make one continent, Pangea, you reduce the living space by more than 50%, leading to overcrowding. And so things started to die. When things die, organisms, including you and I, are made of carbon. When something dies, the corpse is going to remove oxygen from the water. So not only do you have overcrowding, you have oxygen being removed from the water, and that led to suffocation. So that 95% of marine species became extinct. There was an old movie from the 1960s, and it's about Armageddon. And I can't remember the name of the movie, but there's a cowboy who's on an atomic bomb, and that's the end of the world. This is the closest we came to life disappearing. 245 million years ago with the Permian mass extinction. And that 245 million years ago, that's the beginning of the next era, the Mesozoic era. Please don't forget the Mesozoic era goes from, here it says 252 to 66, but most people think 245 to 65 million years ago. So the Mesozoic era, ladies and gentlemen, you need to remember this, is called the Age of the Dinosaurs. The dinosaurs only lived during the Mesozoic. If you find a dinosaur bone, you can be sure that that rock is between 245 and 65 million years old. Pangea started to break apart after the Mesozoic era. Dinosaurs had an advantage that other land vertebrates did not have. And dinosaurs ended up conquering the world during the Mesozoic era because of this advantage. The advantage they had is when they went to the bathroom, when they did number 2, there was less water in their feces. And so they did not need to drink as much water. They could survive droughts. And they were fast. More and more data indicates that they were warm-blooded. And Let me show you some different kinds of dinosaurs. I don't really have time in physical geology to talk in detail about the different kinds of dinosaurs, but I'll show you some of them. In historical geology, we talk about a lot more. These are the largest animals to ever walk the face of the earth. This is a plant-eating dinosaur, Brachiosaurus, and it is a sauropod. The sauropods were the largest. Brachiosaurus is a type of sauropod, the largest animals to ever walk the face of the earth. Look how big they are compared to an automobile and these two people. They are plant eaters. Look at its long neck. And it walked on four legs. It's a quadruped. Its teeth were peg-like, and they ate the vegetation that dominated the land back then, which was ferns. Nowadays, it's grasslands, but back in the Mesozoic, during Mesozoic, there was no grass yet. So we had fern plains instead of grass plains. And these large sauropods would walk the ground. And also notice their small head. They're not very intelligent. They're not a carnivore. Carnivores are things like the theropods. So if you take historical geology, we talk about this in detail. There are 7 kinds of dinosaurs, but we're only going to talk about 2 here because we have too much ground to cover to finish physical geology. But the most famous ones, well, this is not the most famous one. That's Allosaurus. Well, let me show you Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is probably the most famous of the theropods. Tyrannosaurus. Tyrannosaurus Rex lived at the later part of the Mesozoic. It walked on 2 legs, and it had, look at its big head. It had a lot of high intelligence, and it had sharp teeth made for killing. 2 grappling hook-like arms to grab onto the neck of something like a sauropod, and it would bite down on the neck, and due to blood loss, the plant eater would die. These are called theropods. It's important to mention that mammals appeared during the Mesozoic era. Mammals appeared during the Mesozoic era, not the Paleozoic. Mammals would eventually evolve into all the mammals we have today. Now, what are mammals? Humans are mammals. Dogs are mammals. Cows are mammals. Mice are mammals. What do all mammals have in common? Well, they're warm-blooded. They have a 4-chambered heart opposed to a reptile's 3-chambered heart. So they can pump more blood. They have a bigger pump in their chest. That leads to a larger brain and higher intelligence. Mammals also have a mothering instinct. It's hardwired into the DNA of female mammals, including humans, to protect their young. Now, I know people are always going to ask me, what about the fathering instinct? I'm sure your father probably cared about you. My father was a big part of my life. There is a fathering instinct, but it's only with the more intelligent mammals, humans, some apes, and it can even go into dogs can have a father instinct too. It's kind of rare, but I've seen it before. Have you ever seen a dog with a fathering instinct? I've seen a dog with a fathering instinct. When I moved here to Tennessee, I had got an American Eskimo dog, And I have her granddaughter here in my house somewhere here. American Eskimo dog. Have you ever seen these dogs before? They're big, hairy, white dogs. Anyway, I brought my first American Eskimo dog here. Her name was Beauty when I moved here from Minnesota. And um, at that time, uh, a, a couple years later, my daughter and my son, who I divorced, I had a divorce, and anyway, my ex-wife lived in California, and they would come and visit me. And my daughter said, Beauty was out in the front yard, and said, "Oh, Sam is jumping on Beauty." Sam is this little dachshund, like 3 times smaller than my dog. And I went out to look, and I could see that what was going on. The Sam was trying to have sex with my dog, so I didn't worry about it because Sam is so small and Beauty's so big. I didn't think anything would happen. He's not going to hit that target, I thought. But a couple months later, my dog was pregnant and had a baby, and it was like a dachshund-like dog with white hair on it. A strange-looking dog. There was only one puppy in the whole litter, and I knew it was Sam. It was the father. Anyway, Sam comes and lives up the road about 100 yards, a couple hundred yards, yeah, about 100 yards up the road. And he's a real smart dog. He digs holes under the chain link fence and then escapes. And he would always come to visit his daughter. And Beauty would try and scare him away and growl at him, but he took his daughter for a walk up the street and he brought her back. I said, "Good for Sam." He's he's like, "I have my visitation rights and I'm gonna take them." What a dog. Anyway, that's a father instinct. Mammals have that. So the mammals appeared during the Mesozoic era, but they were small and they were insignificant. They lived in fear in a world dominated by dinosaurs. They were nocturnal. That means they went to hunt at night and slept during the day, and they lived underground in little tunnels. They were small, just maybe a foot or two across, in the world dominated by dinosaurs. Um, Something happened 65 million years ago. The dinosaurs became extinct. And that's the end of the Mesozoic era, the beginning of the Cenozoic era. So in the next video, we'll talk about the KT extinction. How did the dinosaurs become extinct? We'll talk about that next time.